Emulation. We love emulators. We get to play and preserve our favorite classic and even modern games. A lot of the times, they are the superior way to experience video games, with higher resolutions, hacks, accessibility, and more. But some are wondering, are emulators legal? Well, yes, as long as the source code is different from the owner of the hardware or software. So then why was Yuzu have been taken down by these companies? So what's legal and what isn't? This whole topic is a gray area of the legality of it, and I want to talk about some of the history of emulators and the legal side of it, and give you my perspective on it. The first emulator that comes to mind was actually really recent, Yuzu. You know, the one that was forced to be shut down by Nintendo. Let me give you some context. Zelda, you may have heard of it, one of the most acclaimed series of all time, and Nintendo was cooking up their newest game called Tears of the Kingdom. May 1st, 2023 comes around and it gets leaked. Soon after, people pirated it and started to play on their emulators, most notably Yuzu. The game was pirated 1 million times according to some news articles. This also significantly increased patrons on the Yuzu page to access early builds. Yuzu was the most popular emulator on the market, and you could see why Nintendo had a problem with all of this. Yuzu was taken down by Nintendo, which claimed that Yuzu was facilitating piracy on a colossal scale according to the case documents. In addition to showing how to dump keys, the difference between Yuzu and all of the other Nintendo Switch emulators is that Yuzu showed you step by step on how to dump keys of a system that is being active and manufactured. This might have been the culprit of Nintendo taking down Yuzu, because to do this, you need a hackable Switch manufactured before 2018, because pre-2018, the NVIDIA Tegra chip's hardware security was easily hackable, and Nintendo could not fix it through a software update. A hardware change was required. So Nintendo released version 2 of the Switch that improved the battery life and made other minor changes, but the most significant change was altering the hardware to make it more secure. This made it much harder to hack the Switch. You can use custom firmware on older hardware to use homebrew applications. Using homebrew apps, you can use tools to alter the Switch, the most notable of which is Lockpick. Lockpick is a tool that dumps your keys from your own personal Nintendo Switch and no one else's, and you can also potentially share these keys online, which Nintendo does not want anyone to do. These keys are used to decrypt games running on an emulator, which is why Switch emulators require keys to play games, most importantly, pirated games. And this of course affects Nintendo because the Switch is still in production. Using those methods I mentioned may be classified as illegal because of fair use according to Nintendo. And technically speaking, whether you like it or not, Nintendo is in the right, because they are bypassing security measures to obtain their keys, and circumventing DRM. However, DMCA is abused by corporations, taking down anything that remotely alters or breaks their intellectual property, even if the person is in the right. So it really comes down to whether or not you think it is moral or ethical that obtaining keys are good. Obviously, in my opinion, I think it's okay to dump your own Switch to get keys because it is your own personal Switch, but the whole method of getting keys and dumping Switch games is very muddy in the waters of what's legal and isn't. Yuzu isn't handing keys to people, rather gives tools and guides in order to run pirated software, which is not legal. Look, I'm just gonna state the obvious here. Most people that use emulators just pirate ROMs and files because they don't want to make the hassle of hacking their consoles. You can save so much more time by just going to a website and getting an ISO and getting keys off the internet, and many of the retro games aren't sold anymore. There is also people who are just broke. From my perspective, I think game preservation is most important, but that is a whole discussion for another video. So back to the Yuzu emulator, Yuzu had two options: fight in court and had some chance of winning, or shut down the emulator and take the settlement. It is far too expensive and risky to go up against a multi-billion-dollar company, so of course they decided to shut down. Ryujinx and a few other Switch emulators are not getting taken down by Nintendo, at least at the very moment, because they don't provide guides on how to dump keys. They also don't lock early access builds through Patreon and implement the changes to the public after a week, which Yuzu did. And that may also contribute Nintendo to have eyes on this emulator. Even the case documents suggest this. That's generally the story of the Yuzu's shutdown, but you would be surprised to hear that another emulator almost does the exact same thing: PCSX2. PCSX2 requires you to have a BIOS for the emulator to function and play games. PCSX2 also gives you a detailed guide on how to dump BIOS, which again makes it super complicated of why this hasn't been taken down, but Yuzu did. There are several answers we can discuss. The PS2 is 2 decades old, so there is no production. Sony is less stingy than Nintendo. The way to dump BIOS is legal than dumping keys from the Switch, and they don't lock early builds on a paywall. I think these reasons contribute to the fact that there was no action against them, especially after what Sony dealt legal issues about emulators in the past. In the year of 2000, Sony filed a lawsuit towards Bleem for their emulators for Windows and Mac, called Bleemcast, which allowed users to play PlayStation and Dreamcast games. The court was in favor of Sony until Bleem appealed the decision because it was under fair use, showing innovations while not profiting. And of course, Sony lost. But the sad story is that Bleem was eventually shut down due to the cost of legal finances. It was just too big. What's scary about emulation and lawsuits in general is corporates can really sue anybody, even if the person is still in the legal rights. Sony sued another group of people that was called the Virtual Game Station. Sony also lost on this case by all counts. The Virtual Game Station is a legitimate competitor and they don't want to monopolize the market. These two main cases is what caused all of the companies that are against the emulators to back off because the Supreme Court rules that all this is considered fair use. Now it really starts to get hazier on how you dump files or games, because the law says yes and no about copying your dump files. And like I said in the user portion, hacking your Switch using Lockpick is the only way to dump your games, and Nintendo DMCA'd it. Because even though law states that to circumventing a technological measure, you need authority of the copyright owner. So is dumping keys illegal? That's a whole other side to the story that we may get back to a later video. This video covers the emulators itself. The second part will cover ROMs, BIOS, and keys if obtaining is legal, and the third video will just bring all this together. Now some emulators don't require you to dump your own keys or firmware, like the Dolphin emulator. Dolphin does not require keys from your personal console because 1. GameCube games are not encrypted, 2. Wii games are encrypted, so it uses the Wii's common key to decrypt the games. The common key is the same for every single Wii system. It was reverse engineered by Team Twizzlers, if I'm saying it incorrectly, I'm sorry, and the keys were publicly available and free to use. The keys that were extracted are not from Nintendo, making Dolphin in the clear for now. Switch games require keys personally from Nintendo, that's just how they work. This includes other emulators out there like MGBA, Project 64, and more. Pretty much older emulators are like this. These emulators are probably the most accessible and easiest to set up, and a significant portion of people that use emulators use on school computers or smartphones to play ROM hacks of Pokemon or Mario. It's by far the easiest to play nowadays. So back to the original question. Are emulators legal? Like I said in the beginning, yes, as long as the source code is different than the owner of the hardware or software, and as long as the emulator does not provide any dump files or pirated software to play games. And it starts getting muddier of how the emulator handles guides of dumped files, lock early builds through donations, and if the keys were reverse engineered, because the keys are used to decrypt games to play them. But then again, I'm not a lawyer, and many people who touch on this topic have different answers. But to put the editor's take, I believe emulation is very important and needs to stay, especially emulators after the console's life cycle. Preserving these games is important for the industry because a lot of the games just don't get released. Companies get upset towards emulators when in fact, a lot of the reasons why people use them in the first place is because either it's convenient, better image quality, smooth, or because the company does not sell those games anymore. And I think instead of complaining, make better optimizations and quality to your older games and you will see less piracy. It won't completely remove it, but it'll still help. Some consoles claim that they have their own classics library when in fact it's just a small fraction of the library. And their emulation is arguably worse than the fan-made emulators. So I could go on and ramble more about this stuff, but that is all I gotta say about this topic. Give you some insight of the legality of emulation. It's really tricky to wrap your head around sometimes. I know I did while researching for this video. So like this video if you found it enjoyable, and if you want to see more essays, topics, and discussions of the worlds of emulation, please subscribe for more content like this. See you guys in the next video.